Oftentimes we discuss how local law enforcement is becoming more and more militarized. Well, we have another example of that. And Vice did some really great reporting and got some really interesting data about how local police enforcement is now hiring unpaid interns to do the exact same job that local police enforcement do. And that's problematic because do you really want an unpaid intern who doesn't have the same training using a gun and enforcing the law? Now, we've actually increased our spending on law enforcement. However, none of that money, or very little of that money, actually goes towards salaries or hiring more police officers. The majority of that money does go toward military-grade weaponry, which local law enforcement has no business owning. However, if you look at certain cities throughout the country, this whole unpaid internship thing is pretty widespread. In New York City, they have about 4,500 unpaid police officers or volunteer police officers. Los Angeles has 700. Other cities include Las Vegas, Oakland, Miramar, Florida, Wichita, Kansas, Whitney, Texas. And in 2011, more than 2,100 departments chose to use these volunteers, and that's according to the International Association of Chiefs of Police. So I kind of have a little bit of a problem with this because I don't want an unpaid intern having a gun and enforcing the law. I mean, just to give you an example, in Wichita, Kansas, they're looking for someone to not only make arrests, but to take prisoners to jail as well as conduct specialized investigations and raids. John, thoughts?
That seems like a horrible idea, if only because it might lead to Vince Vaughn making a movie about it. But no, this could work, and I understand the pressure that these police departments are under. If their budgets are being cut and they're being given these large amounts of money to selectively be used on buying, for instance, military Humvees and things like that, then I understand that they're going to take the money. But this wouldn't be a problem if you were simply saying, and in many cases this might be the case, we're just going to take people from the community, they're going to be representative of the community, they're going to be reasonable people, and they're going to do some basic level of law enforcement. Perhaps that would be okay. When you get into raids and escorting prisoners and things like that, I think that this is less likely going to supplement the usual police force, and more likely it's going to draw in jackasses like George Zimmerman and other people who have this God complex and want to be put in a situation where they get a chance to use a gun on someone. And we're going to be talking later on today in the main show about the guy who followed a suspected burglar, hopped a fence, and then shot him in self-defense. Unfortunately, especially, you mentioned Florida. In Florida especially, we have people who think that any situation they can put themselves in where they have to use a gun is a good day. And I don't think that that's a good direction for our police departments to go in.
I feel like there's a dangerous cocktail here because we have this gun-obsessed culture. We have, an issue with anger toward the government, understandably so, but some people take it a little too far. We have this culture of paranoia that's pushed upon us by the mainstream media, right? Everyone is constantly worried about their rights being taken away for the wrong reasons. I mean, to have people who are already probably drunk off their own power joining the police force with weapons, and they don't have the same training, they're not getting the same pay. I don't like the idea of a volunteer police officer.
I mean, I felt the same way that you just did initially. And then I started to really think about it, and I thought, oh, I don't want some guy on a power trip with a gun. And I was like, wait a second. That's cops. Like,
but it's not going to make it better to hire like random members of society, like to also enforce the law. I mean,
of course, there's a huge issue here, and the biggest one would be the training aspect. However, I'm a little concerned about the type of training that our military members, or not military, our police force, they're basically well, and that's what I was going to say. They're getting kind of basically military type training to go out, especially these SWAT teams. And so, I mean, I'm not sure I'm on board with the real training that the cops who are getting paid are getting. So maybe it's better if these people aren't getting that type of training. There used to be kind of this idea, right, that the cops' #1 job was to protect citizens, right? Mm-hmm. Now it's to protect themselves. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure where that shift happens, but I feel like it has to be somewhere in the training or somewhere in the culture. And maybe these people won't be as exposed to that.
Yeah, as I'm reading about this story, honestly, and I'm going to be a little crude, I guess, in my wording, but this is a libertarian's wet dream. Anytime you debate libertarian fiscal policy, the argument is always, well, look at fire departments throughout the country. They just hire some officials, but in reality, there are rural parts of the country where they have volunteer fire department. Okay, well, that's maybe an okay argument, but do you want the same thing happening with the police force, right? Where you privatize security, right? You stop paying publicly, you stop using taxpayer money to pay these police officials. Some people hire their private security and others depend on volunteers. I mean, that is not okay. That is problematic. You do need to have a standard of training. You do need to make sure that there are background checks ensuring that these people with guns don't go out there because they're drunk off their own power. There needs to be some sort of regulation in place. And the problem is the regulation differs from one department to another. So you never know what you're going to get.
Yeah, you know, it's really a tragedy, this phenomenon of unpaid internships. Or as a result of this economic crisis, you have people, mostly young people, so desperate for work that employers can just say, hey, you can work for us, but we're just not going to pay you anything at all. You're just lucky to be here and not sitting at home on your couch. But these unpaid intern police officers is a bit different, whereas unpaid intern workers are making quite a bit of profits for their private employer. This is something different. And these unpaid intern police officers, what they're going to be doing is competing for the right to become a real police officer and be paid. And with the culture of the police being so brutal and so abusive, whether it's a rookie cop trying to prove himself by shooting someone, or a veteran cop who thinks he's John Wayne, for these intern cops to be fitting into this culture of the police department, to be earning their place, I imagine that they may even be exerting a bit more brutality than the regular officers. And I think, you know, we're here in Southern California, we've just come off of a really shocking verdict in the Kelly Thomas trial, where the officers who beat this homeless man to death by punching him in the face until he died, you know, they were just found not guilty of murder, of manslaughter, and they were found not guilty even of excessive force, this being the accepted culture in the police department. When those other officers showed up, when you see on the video showing up to this brutal beating, those 4 officers don't show up and say, hey, well, this is a little crazy, what's happening here? They show up and they join in the beating. This is the culture, and these unpaid interns, no doubt, are going to be adopting this culture to try to get these jobs.
I think that you've made a great point about that. Some people do want to be volunteer police enforcement because they genuinely do want to help society. So I don't want to come down hard on all of these people, right? But what you said totally makes sense. These people are hungry. They want to get a job within the police department, and they need to prove themselves. How are you going to prove yourself? Are you going to aggressively go after people that you don't really need to go after? So I think that it sets a really, really bad standard with law enforcement. And also, these are people that put their lives on the line to protect us. They should be getting a salary.
Yeah. Well, also, I feel bad for the interns, because we've covered studies on my channel that show that interns don't necessarily have any higher chance of getting hired. Yeah. So you're shit out of luck there. But also, one of the requirements that one of the departments had was that you need to be trained to use guns in both the left and right hand, which is exciting for John Woo movies in The Matrix, but I think they should stick to one gun at a time.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And by the way, just one final point about what's happening with crime in the country. If you look at statistics, crime is actually down significantly. Between 1993 and 2010, gun homicides went down by 49%, violent crime decreased by 72%. Detroit's homicide rate is actually the lowest it's been in the last 20 years, and LA's homicide rate is the lowest it's been since 1966. So they don't need military-grade weaponry. Let's get rid of that. Let's stop wasting our taxpayer money on that. And also, if you are going to have volunteers in the police department, we need a real way of training them to ensure that they're not going to go out there and do something brutal and something that isn't actually going to be productive for society.